Hello everybody, this is Peter Wainwright, your facilitator for this evening's webinar from now till 7 o'clock. I'm a tutor with the Open University Business School, and I'm also a consultant in the area of strategy, creativity and innovation. The subject today is strategy matters in turbulent times, thinking big data and thinking business models, and we'll have some rich discussion from our panelists and from the videos and from your poll results showing how these two ideas mesh together. So let's have a quick look at the objectives. The objectives really is to share some of the highlights from the Strategy Masterclass, or the Business Perspectives Masterclass that was on the 21st of September. And from that, we want to give you some insights about designing and delivering an innovative business model, and to think about global disruptions driven by these themes of digitalization or digitization and big data. Okay, so I'll now introduce you to our panel. We have three panelists. We have Professor Thomas Lawton. He's Professor of Strategy and International Management at the Open University Business School, and has written extensively on this subject and has a lot of expertise in a number of industries. Hello, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes, Peter. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm delighted to have you with us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Lovely to hear from you. And then we have Jerry Tehan. He's a head of strategic business development, looking at network and cloud services with the BT Group, and has a very rich background in the area of technological developments across a number of sectors in an international context. Hello, Jerry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Peter. Good evening, everybody. Great to see so many people on the session.
Thank you very much. And then we also have Dr. Hilary Collins, a lecturer in management at the Open University Business School, and also a fellow tutor on strategic management. And she's got a lot of research experience and expertise in strategy and design and innovation. So we have a very rich panel. Hilary, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks very much, Peter, and welcome everybody, and I hope you get a lot of interesting data from our session and webinar.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'll just put this slide up which shows how we're going to run this evening. We've done our introductions. How you can pose questions in the chat? Well, it's a very simple kind of chat box. We encourage you to post away, and it's great to see, I recognize a few names there, past students and some fellow tutors, and we've got alumni and non-alumni and people from around the world. That's fantastic. So you just post away in the chat there, and we'll pick up some of the themes. Do feel free to ask a question of our panelists, and we'll pick out some of the key questions and use them for discussion. We're going to hear from Tom Lawton giving us an overview of the flavour of the masterclass in London. Then we're going to have three segments of a video and a poll and discussion, two polls, and the video 3 will then lead us into a final wrap-up and discussion. So we've got these three short videos which will cover a very rich range of topics. And then we hopefully finish at 7 o'clock. So I'd like now to hand over to Tom, just to give us a flavour of that masterclass, please.
Sure, Peter. I'll keep it brief. Our event in central London on September 21st had about 70-odd people. We had a very good interface, I would say, a very good conversation. The purpose of the event was to integrate research, consulting, and practice in a discussion about the interface of data, digital, and business models. So the kinds of questions that we raised included, what is a business model, and how can managers innovate existing business models to create new market opportunities? How have digital technologies transformed business models? How can big data drive a growth-oriented business model? We were fortunate to have a set of very good speakers there representing insights and experiences from large corporations, mid-sized companies at the C-suite level, and consultancy. I added some of my thoughts based on 20 years of research, writing, and advisory work in strategic management. And I think we got a lot of insights into it. I think people took away ideas perhaps that they hadn't thought about before, or ways of thinking about the issues that they hadn't thought about, as well as some very practical insights from some of our speakers.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Tom. Difficult to summarize such a rich discussion from that half-day session in London. So let's move on soon to the first of our segments. We're going to have a video which is about 6 minutes long, when we're listening to Jerry giving us some really useful insights into issues like the digital value chain, which may be a new concept for some people. He's going to be mentioning a few key terms, and we put them up on the screen. It'd be very interesting to hear in the chat whether you regularly use these kind of terms in your organization, or whether you think this is something you really need to get to grips with. So I think there are subtle differences between these, and the API word will crop up a few times. But again, do feel free to ask questions. So I'm now going to move us on to the next video segment for 6 minutes. So sit back and relax, and then we'll have a poll and discussion afterwards. So Jess is our support manager from Workcast, the platform we're using. If you could now please give us video 1.
What I talk about here now is how is the digital value chain changing? So traditionally here, this is just an example of ad agencies. Traditionally, you would have content, you would produce products, you would have pushed them through a contract, through a channel. And the channel here obviously is TV, radio, and print. And that's fine. That was the way for a long time that you delivered your products to market. Then this thing called the internet came along, and people realized that they could go straight into the internet and go to a portal and get at your products, and working maybe with the web team to support that. But now what you find is there's a new actor in the digital value chain, and that new actor is the developer. And this is one of the key messages I have for you today. You need to think about the developer as you evolve your digital strategy, because the developer is the person that is going to look at how to interact with your application and eventually back into your back-end content. You will need to support that developer with an API team. And I will talk now about what that actually means. But it is important to realize there is this change happening right now as we speak. There is a change happening where there's a new actor in the digital value chain. You need to be aware of the developer. And this new digital economy is throwing up lots of different business cases, the business models that Tom will talk about around the gig economy, sharing economy. I put in the API economy as well, fintech. So these are all new digital business models, but it's also causing other changes in the corporate environment, such as marketing is becoming the new IT. Remember, in our MBT survey, we saw the marketing department as being one of the power brokers now in the new digital space. And that's changing other things like inside sales, analytics, this thing called DevOps, which I'll explain. User experience and customer experience is changing. So the digital economy is changing the way we look at the traditional parts of our organization. Platform companies, as we're aware of, like Uber, Facebook, these are very good examples of the digital economy because they show you what you actually need in terms of capability. They show you that you can be a multi-sided business. Facebook doesn't produce content, but they're one of the biggest content channels in the world, if not the biggest now. And I talk about the 4 levers of platform leadership. So those 4 levers are looking at your core technology, looking at different parts of your business in terms of internal and external capability and the technology itself. So coming back then to, we mentioned the digital value chain and the power of the developer in that digital value chain. So one of the powers of that actor now in the digital value chain is using APIs. And I have given this talk before to business leaders, and I've asked people, what is an API? Do you know what an API is? And one of the things that I would say in my prediction for you as business leaders in the next few years, you will need to know what an API is, right? So an application programming interface, here we have an example of a startup that is in the payment space that basically fulfills payments through web interactions through an API. And here you have an example of publishing an API to a developer and allowing that developer to embed that product SKU code into a Twitter feed. So imagine you have a Twitter feed where you say, click here to buy my product. So that's quite powerful if you can fulfill all of that back-end payment in the Twitter feed. So that's actually quite powerful. And one point I make here about APIs is that they're a product, not an IT project. It's not another IT project. This is a product that will be in your business. I would predict for everybody in the room, you will be doing something with APIs in the next few years. You need to have a sense of urgency about it, and that API needs to be controlled in terms of versioning, metering, authentication, security, all the things you would normally do with a product. And then I mentioned earlier that marketing is the new IT. And what I mean by that is that the marketing department, and you see the emergence of the chief digital officer, these are the new power brokers in the digital space. And you see startups that are starting to address that need. So for example, companies like Intra are producing a new way of interacting with your customers. So in the future, a lot of your customers will be interacting with you at the browser level, and Intercom provides you that, let's call it Google Analytics on steroids type of experience. Here you have Facebook doing messaging chats. Here you have a company called Alto Cloud that does customer care, again embedded in the online interaction through the browser. Your people will have to change into a new lean agile environment. I think you've all heard of lean and agile. This is the new environment for developing. It's not just about developers, but also the people that make the operational run smoothly in the cloud. That's your DevOps team. And then you have people like inside sales who are becoming more and more important. Your user experience and customer experience, your chief digital officer, and maybe even your chief customer officer. These are all the new people that you need to think about in your new digital, your move to digital.
Okay, well, that was a fascinating insight into digital value chains and the new kind of terminology that we are probably going to have to get used to. We'll be launching poll 1 in a second, but I just first wanted to come to Tom. I know we're coming to business models, innovation thinking later, but to what extent do you think this notion of a digital value chain is really kind of disrupting people? And is it something that's difficult to get to grips with? Or is it really, a major change in your experience?
I think the idea of a digital value chain increases perhaps the ability for companies to reach across borders, which adds further complexity to business models. Although, interestingly, I think we're seeing in many sectors a reversal of the move towards offshoring, for example, to nearshoring and reshoring of activities, particularly in the United States, as cost differentials have decreased, as government and regulatory pressures have increased as well in companies. So I guess what I'm saying is that digital is another way of sort of reconstructing value chains and therefore reconfiguring business models. But there are other variables which can counteract or impact upon the decisions of companies as well at a strategic level.
Sure, that's it, yeah. So interesting how the digital world or digitalization can cross borders, of course. Okay, so let's have a look at the poll questions. They're on the screen now. So based on that short segment, and again, from your own experience, we'd like you all to vote in a second, but let's look at the 4 questions. So which aspects does your organization most need to focus on now? Is it really about recognizing, recruiting these kind of key roles, getting the structure in place and getting into the sort of the opportunities that those people can bring? Or is it B, more of a sort of getting down to the nuts and bolts of embracing specific kind of technologies, looking at the interfaces between different systems, the APIs? Or is it C, adopting lean and agile methods to improving your digital value chain, this notion of being kind of more responsive? Or is it D, really actually shifting towards this culture, towards the very idea of a digital value chain? So, Jess, if we could launch the poll for people to vote, that would be fantastic. I think that you should be seeing that on your screens now. While we're voting, Hilary, may I just come to you and looking at your sort of research and experience in sort of design thinking. To what extent do people need to think about how we actually kind of redesign our organization? Do you think this design word is actually central to this digitalization approach?
Yeah, I think it is. Perhaps Jerry would disagree, but I was particularly interested in what you had to say about the role of the developer and how pivotal that was. I wondered perhaps if there was a role for design thinking there, where we're actually taking a large problem from many perspectives, from people with different specialities, and trying to incorporate that within the organization itself. And that perhaps design thinking would have a role there, because it does seem that the developer having such a pivotal role brings with it some risk and also a high level of power from their behalf.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, where is the power shifting to in the organisation? What I'm really interested in your from our participants is anybody actually going through this kind of cultural change? Do people really think they've got them got this culture moving? Could you just so we've got changing culture 48%, understanding and embracing is 24%, and whoops, yeah, I can't see the rest. Okay, folks, well that hasn't worked as fully as we planned. Oh yeah, and adopting lean or agile methods is 20%. So let's just get this right. So it was changing the culture is 48%, which is quite a large percentage. Understanding, embracing the specific technologies, 24%. Adopting lean approach is 20%, and recruiting and recognizing is much smaller. I don't have the exact figure. So that's really interesting for those people who are involved in leadership roles and looking at the culture change aspects. We're going to move ahead now because we've got video 2 about to roll, and this is where Tom Lawton is going to be talking about leveraging our business model for innovation and growth. So Jess, can you please get the video rolling?
So a business model is in one way an interconnected, contextualized pattern of attributes. It's about value creation, value capture. So 4 dimensions of value which are fused together, if you will, within a business model. The value proposition to the customer or to the intended customer. What is it you're actually trying to sell here? What is it that people will be attracted to? The process, the activities involved in creating value. We might think of value chain ideas from Michael Porter, etc. The capturing of the value, perhaps the most important, right? We can have great value proposition and great value creation activities, but do we actually capture that value? And I think we might add that in there, this notion of how do you actually then preserve what you have also. Because we're fixated on growth, and of course that's essential, but we also perhaps need to preserve. So therefore a business model describes the logic of how a company does business, how it creates and captures value through its activities. I'm not saying you have to agree with that definition, but it's a definition. By distinction, innovation, if we bring the word innovation in here, business model innovations change the economics of your value chain, diversifying profit streams and modifying delivery models. So think about that. Think about each word within that statement because they all have impact and they all matter. Reconfiguring the value chain, outsourcing, offshoring activities, for instance, could be those sorts of elements of reconfiguration of the value chain to bring about a new business model. Diversifying your product streams, moving into, again, examples have been given by Jerry very clearly about the diversification of your streams of profitability and activity, and modifying your delivery model. So building on what I've been saying, I'm going to share with you some of my own work here, which is what's called a breakout strategy approach through a book I wrote some years ago. In this, we focus very much on, in a sense, if you think back to those 4 value ideas I had earlier, it's the confluence of the first 2. How you bring together the customer and the market with your way of doing things, in a sense. And of course, not just you, but you and your supply chain partners in an integrated way. So it's a vehicle for delivering your value proposition to your customers. So another way of thinking about this is, I'm a business school professor, so I've got to have a few 2x2 matrices, right? So let me share with you a couple of other ways of thinking about this, which again is based on my own work in terms of different approaches. And I'd urge you here, I know many of you are working for or have your own small companies here. Perhaps think about your own organization and think about which of these types is most relevant for me and what I do, or which type perhaps should I be moving towards building as for the future. So the first two types are taken by storm are typically new entrant companies or spin-off companies or companies that are more, let's say, entrepreneurial in some way or another. Within that, I talk about emergent established market. Emergent market can be either an emergent business area, a new market space caused by technological disruption, for instance, or like driverless cars, or it can be a new geographical emergent market as well. Established being obvious, it is that which exists where there is perhaps an oligopoly situation or where there is incumbency, not much dynamic or innovation has happened for a long time, and then somebody comes in and shakes it all up. True originals, Google is everywhere, as we know. It's an example of a true original. You don't have to be first into the market. Google was not the first internet search company. You know you've made it as a true original when your name becomes synonymous with the action. We all Google, in the way that one time we used to all Hoover. Again, we talk about disruption and see how they have fallen behind. Revolutionaries are those that come in with something new. They shake things up in terms of the expectations of customers. Now, I know that bookies are maybe not the most politically correct example to give. But if we think about gambling, which is a massive business, particularly online, right? We all know that. It's one of the biggest online businesses. Paddy Powers came in and disrupted that space. So where you were used to having the bookies on the corner, where all the old guys would kind of shuffle in, hoping nobody would see them, and place their bets and stay in there half the evening perhaps. Nowadays, you can do it from the secrecy of your own home or in the back of your Uber cab or wherever it might be. And you can gamble on almost anything. Another thing which Paddy Power introduced, the range of things you can gamble on was increased significantly. So shaking things up. Laggard to leader are business models that are either failing or underperforming companies that come in and shake things up in a different way. A wave rider idea is as a surfing notion. The idea, it's a high-risk strategy. When it pays off handsomely, but often it may not. It's also the idea of adopting and adapting a business model from somewhere else. Ryanair adopted the Southwest business model from the United States, many people are aware, and they adapted it for the European regulatory and market context, and of course their own corporate context, their own culture, their own ownership structures, etc., which made it different from how it was in Southwest. So adapting and adopting. Big improvers are, I've been involved in a research project with Lamborghini for the last 4 years. And the turnaround of Lamborghini is an interesting one. Of course, driven by the takeover by Audi. But there's more to it than that. This idea of big improver is focusing on efficiency and effectiveness. So adopting and adapting is the wave rider. Efficiency and effectiveness is the big improver. Meaning, get closer to your customer and strip out cost, bring in more technological efficiency into your operations and supply chain, which Lamborghini has done incredibly well the last 10, 15 years, repositioning itself in terms of away from Europe to Middle East and elsewhere in the world, reconfiguring their supply chain entirely to avail of the efficiencies of the wider VW supply chain, for instance. And finally, Spanning Horizons is about spatial growth, internationalization, etc. Again, Apple, boundary breaker is the idea of you are internationalizing through the force of your own brand, usually, but you do so in a very controlled way. And conquistador is those that do so through acquisition, primarily. Cemex is a Mexican company in building materials, cement building materials, extremely good at cross-border acquisition and integration. Those of you who have been involved in M&A know that most of the problems happen after the activity, right? The integration of the cultures and the environment of the organizations. Most of the time it doesn't work very well. These guys are very good at doing that because they focus, to put it simply, they focus on operational integration and cultural integration equally. And finally, shapeshifters, the hardest thing to do. The idea is a science fiction idea that you might be aware. Originally, classic Star Trek. I know nobody's going to admit to being a Trekkie here, but I'm sure there are many closet Trekkies around. More recently, perhaps Mystique from X-Men. This notion of transmutation, taking on another identity. Well, that's the extreme form. Nokia, what did Nokia start out doing? Paper, pulp, rubber, those kinds of things. They don't do any of that anymore. Most people maybe wouldn't even recognize that. So the shapeshifters, it's about bringing business model innovation in. The Googles, the Amazons, again, Jerry's given these examples, the Apples, right? The GEs. All of these have been transmutating in different ways, moving, evolving. Sometimes they sell off their original businesses. Many times they don't. Amazon still sells books. Google still does internet search. Apple still sells computers. This is kind of bringing it all together for you. This is a model I developed some years back. It's the idea of a breakout strategy, which is basically saying, look, strategy is one of those words like innovation that everybody uses all the time, everywhere, right? Everyone's got a strategy for everything all the time. Most of the time, it's not strategy, folks. It's tactics, or it's some level of operational detail. We need to think about this in an integrated way and in a cyclical way because strategy is not a linear activity, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year plan. The world moves on the day after you've done that, let alone 3 years after you've done that. We talked about agility. Agility is out the window if you've got these 3-year plans that you then get buy-in internally and externally. And then you try to change. Well, hey, it's like the proverbial oil tanker turning around, right? You need to be able to tack like the sailboat, ideally with an outboard engine on the back as well to give you extra thrust, right? But this is the way I'm thinking about it. As I said, I won't go into all the detail of this. I've been talking about business model. It's about having that vision, that sense of purpose and direction, driving the organization through the value proposition, that clear sense of this is what we're about, this is what we sell, this is what we don't sell, this is why you should come to us. The business model, I've been talking about that because, in a sense, this is about the development of strategy and the delivery of strategy. Because without the delivery, without the implementation, it's pointless, right? Push through into the enactment, the choice of M&A, for example, as a way to deliver the strategy. I talked about the example of Cemex. And then push it down into your tactics. As a Chinese proverb, everything is achievable if you break it down into small enough pieces. Take that big vision, push it through the cycle, break it down into tactics. And at the heart of this is you. Never disconnect the leadership from the practices, the process and the practices.
Well, that was a fascinating insight into various different strategies for breaking out. This notion of breaking out is very key. And I liked Tom's analogy of attacking like a sailboat in the sense of agility. Before we look at the poll, I'd just like to ask Jerry, from the point of view of the sort of digital angle, do you see that as really leading people to radically change their actual business model? Have we got some examples where actually the change is being led by the digital technologies?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that we're seeing businesses that are seeing their customers moving to new digital channels and platforms, and businesses have to move with them. So I guess a key point would be that even if you are an incumbent business, there's a lot of value in what you've built up over the years. You have a lot of data you've built up on your customer base over the years. And you have an opportunity now as those consumers, and let's face it, the new generation Y consumers start to interact with your business as they would prefer more on a mobile, for example, platform or a web platform, there's an opportunity for you to extend your business and grow with them, using what we talked about here in the new digital value chain approach. And I think that's an opportunity for incumbent businesses. And there's lots of examples of companies that are bringing in new digital capabilities into existing environments. I see some questions on the web chat around that, and that is a challenge to bring in digital capabilities into existing businesses. But a lot of businesses are doing that successfully, and they're rolling out their new digital capabilities, and they're generating new business and retaining their current business as customers move towards these new platforms.
That's really interesting. I like the way we talk about digital capabilities, because I know strategy students, we're very used to sort of resource and capability view, and we have this new sort of perhaps even more important concept, digital capabilities. Let's leave that now and look at poll 1. So I can be glad to know, folks, I can now see the poll area on my screen. I've solved my technical hitch problem. So from what we've been seeing on the video and from what Jerry's just been talking to us about, what do you think that you need to consider most in innovating your business model? Is it actually around a clearer understanding of how we're going to capture and sustain that value, bearing in mind all the digital change? Or is it, to use Tom's categories, maybe is it taking by storm, actually finding new or original ways to operate your model? Or is it C, a laggard to leader, maybe moving into leadership, adapting or creatively swiping perhaps a successful model, being more efficient, driving costs down? Or is it D, learning to be more ambidextrous, improving your current offering plus exploring new models, linking into what Jerry was saying about inserting these digital capabilities into your current business? So if we could vote on that, and then we'll get the results in a second, and then we'll comment on that. Could I just ask, Hilary, when we talk about innovating in your business model, again, going back to this theme of sort of design thinking, one could say that, yes, it's all very well having all this sort of technological push, but actually we need some solid kind of strategic or design thinking. No amount of technology can make up for a lack of being truly strategic in our thinking. I mean, is that something that you feel is relevant that we need to remind ourselves of?
Well, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree that strategy needs to come first, and the tech is generally the platform by which we can change what we do and innovate within our organizations. I think design thinking is probably a mode of thinking and reacting, and a way of incorporating a lot of people rather than seeing strategy as perhaps a traditional top-down approach. It's a way of incorporating stakeholders, users, and people within the organization to develop that strategy in order to move on to where we actually want to be.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I like the idea of involving people. It's key, again, with the rise of the various digital skills. How do we involve people who are less comfortable with that? I'm going to move on to the poll 2 results and get a bit of debate about that. We actually have you can see 55% learning to be more ambidextrous. Again, it's a massive result there, and only a slim result on laggard to leader, moving into leadership. And I'm thinking of some of the ideas, the well-used ideas of Michael Porter of cost leadership, for example. Very thin slice, 9% taking by storm, and 32% developing a clearer understanding of how we'll capture and sustain value. Tom, can I ask for your comments on these poll results, please?
Hi, Peter. Having some problems with the visuals here, actually, getting those again. Could you just repeat those to me again, please?
Yeah, right. So we got 55% for number D, learning to be more ambidextrous. 32% was developing a clearer understanding. That's number A. 9% is taking by storm, and a very small percent, about 5%, laggard to leader. So it's 55% about this ambidextrous idea.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in some ways. If we think about some of the criticism that's been leveraged against the disruptive innovation ideas, for example, of Clay Christensen in recent years, where there's been the accusation, for instance, that disruptors don't necessarily establish the leading position in the industries, don't even necessarily survive, and that those companies being disrupted tend to disappear. Actually, in practice, that's not always the way. So I think this notion of ambidexterity, where you're both exploring and exploiting, you're using new ideas, new business model innovations to go after new opportunities, to stretch yourself, what I call shape-shifting, moving yourself into new market arenas, new services, new product offerings to customers, either to existing or to new customers, makes a lot of sense. So I think the idea of innovating for a company that's been around a while or is in a position already that wants to grow the business in some way or sustain its competitive position makes sense to me.
And Jerry, any thoughts from you on this, please, on the results that we're seeing?
Well, I guess it's not surprising that you see such a high results for this ambidextrous approach, because people are working in existing businesses, and you can see a lot of the chat here. People are asking, how do I make this change towards digital happen? So you've got to take this wider narrative that you see in the market now, where people are saying, well, if you don't move to digital, then you may not be around in the next 5 to 10 years. But it is possible for existing businesses to start to transform themselves to keep the business running as it is today, but at the same time develop that in-house digital capability. And I've seen it personally in companies where they successfully set up in-house small teams initially with digital capabilities. And what you find is, as they progress with their initial offerings in the digital space, that the rest of the business looks at what they're doing and they can see that value, and then it starts to permeate across the rest of the business almost by osmosis, because they can see it and touch it in reality. And that small, agile, lean development team and the new ways they're looking at consumers, that becomes something that the rest of the business want to support, adopt.
Thanks, Jerry. It's very interesting, isn't it, about leading strategic change? I mean, doing it bit by bit. But from everything that we're seeing on screen here and from your conversation, it's all leading to much more kind of agility. And how do we keep up as leaders and managers and strategists? Let's leave that segment there, and I'll ask our team to move to video 3, where we're going to hear a Chief Technology Officer's perspective, Antoine Boatwright from Hillgate Travel, giving us some very practical advice about some of the ideas around how you manage your data. So if we can move to video 3, please.
The real answer to big data is big enough data, right? Can that terabyte of data give me what I need to be able to formulate strategy, to execute tactics, to drive what I'm trying to do? And so the first is, and here I'm going to, I think, join Jerry's, is augmented data. I can take my data set, which is just a terabyte, and I can mash it through APIs with data that exists elsewhere. We do this all the time. So for example, in the travel industry, what I do is I mash my data with punctuality statistics on flights, on trains, on et cetera, et cetera. And what I can do is with that data, right, I can actually service my customers and give them refunds, because there's legislation that dictates refunds for delays, right? So my terabyte here now has become my terabyte plus whatever the National Rail Inquiries provides me, whatever flight stats is providing me. So I've all of a sudden got this huge kind of data pool. Derivative data. I'm not talking about artificial intelligence here. I'm talking about applying simple algorithms, simple logic on your existing data to derive other pieces of information. Some of the things, for example, we might like to know is, is our pricing good? How profitable are we? If people fly, how often, frequently do people, when they fly to Madrid, stay at a given hotel? and so on and so forth. So even with that 1 terabyte data set, I can now go derive other data sets as I move forward. Predictive data. I always like to think of data as like a car. You have headlights and taillights. The headlights are trying to look forward in terms of what the world reserves for you. Predictive data is basically trying to derive conclusions from what you're seeing here. Now, the key there is sample size. And there again, it's nothing new. Sample sizes have existed for years and years in statistical analysis. And the question is, how big a sample do you need? And sometimes to provide a prediction that gives you a certain confidence. And the reality is not a very big sample. Pervasive data. Taking your data that you put in reports and you use in management meetings, pushing it out to clients, pushing it out to mobile applications, pushing it out to suppliers. Yeah? Taking that same data set and using it in many different ways. Benchmark data. It's saying, okay, I got a pool of data. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this subset with this subset. So you can do intra data comparisons. So what I want you to take away from this is not the answer, big data. It's big enough data. And by the way, everyone here has probably got more than enough data, even the smallest of us, to be able to start doing some of that kind of big data analysis. But this one is, I believe, from McKinsey. We talked about volume. Yeah, how big does your data need to be? But velocity. Yeah. Here again, it depends on your type of business. If you are a trading organization, your data has to be second. If you are a travel company, your data is probably okay on a weekly basis. So what's the frequency? How quickly does your data set need to change? How quickly do you need to collect that data set? There is this assumption that fast data is good data, but it's not true. It's the right data, yeah, for what you need. Because collecting data, and we'll see this in a second, has a cost, right? None of this comes for free. Variety of data. So for example, if I'm looking a lot in travel, one of the things that we look at, especially now, unfortunately, is around security situations throughout the world. The key source is the FCO, the Foreign Office. However, that's only one data source. What we do is we tend to go out to 4 sources and say, okay, let's normalize that and get a new position. Now, it may be that the 4 sources concur, but they don't always concur, some of it being driven by political variables. Veracity of the data. It's not that you collect it that it means it's true, right? And I can tell you this because I work in a travel agency, and they're meant to collect data at point of entry, at point of sale. But if the traveler who's on the phone gets asked, can you give me your department code? Can you give me your cost center code? Can you give me your project number? And they get one number wrong, yeah, that data is incorrect, right? So understanding the veracity, how good, the quality, if you will, of that data is absolutely key too. Now I'm going to add, this is the 4 V's from McKinsey, and so I'm going to add my 2 V's to this, or 1, in fact, which is value. Value to the business. How does my data drive down costs? How does my data increase revenue? And more importantly, and more new, does my data have intrinsic value? Can I sell my data set to somebody else? So for example, in travel, now I'm not saying we do any of this, in fact we don't, but imagine that a hotel chain could figure out how much of my volume is going to its competitors. Yeah? What would be the value of my data then? Imagine that a visa agency wanted to know what the top destinations for visa requirements were. What would be the value to them then? So there's a value, there's an intrinsic value to data. Value to the customer. One of the things that we do, and we've done recently, is to feed that data back to our customers so that they can make better business decisions, better procurement decisions, negotiate individual deals, route deals, individual hotel deals, negotiate also travel policy. So one of the key things that we've been encouraging our customers is rather than make overly complex travel policies. I don't know, how many of you have got a travel policy in your company? Yeah. It's pretty complicated, I bet. Is say, okay, where's the real value? If I know that one cost center is 80% of my travel, why am I going to go and upset everybody else with a convoluted travel policy, right? So feeding that back to the customer. But, and it's a big but, data doesn't come for free, right? Data, you need to collect it, you need to store it, you need to clean it. And more often, you need to secure it. Yeah? We've just gone through ISO 27001, and I can tell you that it costs you money, first of all. It's the right thing to do, by the way. It is absolutely important, critical. If you haven't got ISO 27001, I'd get straight onto it, because it's really, the minimum of what you need in order to secure your data. And also, it means that you belong to a club, right? A club of people who have got a minimum standard of securing data. And so what you want to do is you want to do business and transact business with other people who are in that club. Yeah? Cost to the customer. In order to gather data, someone has to give data. Yeah? How much of my data am I willing to give you? Am I willing to give you how much of, and typically we need to take as a minimum the name of the passenger, but typically we can take a lot more: credit cards, we can take their personal preferences. Yeah, we can know that they sit in the aisle seat, we can know that they like, I don't know, hotel rooms next to lifts, and so on and so forth. How much of your personal data are you willing to give to us, right? So there's a cost. The other thing is, it's about channels. Yeah, everyone thinks that online is the new digital, but online is just a channel. And there are loads of channels. And there's a lot of innovation in this channel space. Email, contrary to popular belief, is still the biggest channel that any company will have, right? Email, people transact business over email. It's also about new models. I think that Virgin Hotel, they want to give you a mobile app, and in that mobile app, you will buy your hotel room, so you pay for your hotel room. You check out and check in with it. It stores the parameters of what that room looks like, so the temperature of that room, whether you like the shades up or down during the day, what kind of channels you want, etc. And as you walk into that room, because it's location enabled, it becomes like your home away from home. So there's some really disrupting models. I thought this EasyJet one was very interesting. It says we don't see ourselves as an airline, but we see ourselves as an e-commerce platform. You're seeing that the same with Ryanair. The Ryanair CEO has declared that he wants to become an OTA, an online travel agency, from being an airline. So who's going to help you? That famous Ghostbusters, who are you going to call when you need to create your digital strategy? Well, I actually think there's three types of people. I think, and I thought I'd do my own 2x2. So I think you have CIOs. CIOs are really for traditional kind of companies. You see them in banks, very large companies. They're infrastructure transformational people. They commission SaaS products. They run ITIL service organizations. That's it, right? You have CTOs. So I'm kind of one of them. I put a little star because CTOs kind of used in many different contexts. Sometimes they use them for enterprise architects. It's not quite the same thing. So I'm talking about board-level CTOs. And really, those are kind of individuals that are different because they will typically have a software or DevOps organization. Not only will they be deploying and maintaining infrastructure, they're going to be building software. And the software they build isn't the horizontal, non-differentiating type. It's the one that makes the difference in the business. CDOs, I personally, often it's kind of marketing people who want to get into the front, and they're kind of creating the CDOs space. It is becoming more common. They're really about transforming predominantly analog to digital kind of business processes. But I want to posit something, and I want to kind of say there's a new role out there for what I would call a chief imagineering officer, so a different type of CIO. Because, as we've seen today, you're going to have to not only implement more efficient processes, you just fundamentally need to change your business models. But to change your business model, you need to be able to imagine what that might be. And what it might be so far away from where you are today, right? That unless you've got someone with that kind of creativity, you're going to be lost.
Well, that was a very interesting set of really practical advice, and it's raised lots of questions for us. Lots of different things we can do today to look at its velocity, variety, and so on. I'm going to come to Hilary in a second. Hilary, what's your thoughts on that, and particularly this idea that actually we need to be imaginative? So we could spend a lot of time massaging our data, but where does the role of creativity come in this to make sure we don't get too bogged down in just churning through data and not really knowing why we're doing it, perhaps?
Well, actually, creativity comes into it, of course, and I would probably draw a parallel between what Antoine said about who will help, and actually that brings us into the skills and training that we need to develop for people and with people in order to embrace these changes. And I think it ties in quite nicely with what Jerry was saying about the key role of the developer, and then that is a question of skills. And it does bring us to creativity and it brings us to the point about ambidexterity, and I can't say that properly tonight, and how we have to embrace change and move quickly. So yeah, I think it's a huge call for creative skills development and training, actually, and strategic development, being proactive and not reactive, because it does look very much as though we're being reactive at the moment in general.
Okay, thanks very much, Hilary. Jerry, just thinking back to you talked in the first video about the importance of the digital value chain. To what extent do you think that actually getting with the basics of managing all this data that Antoine was talking about is really important? I mean, there seems some fundamental skills that people need about why they're collecting it in the first place, why are we collecting it, why are we analyzing it, perhaps independent of the technology.
Exactly, and I think why are we collecting all of this data? The end game is to get new insights into your business, new insights into your customers, new insights into your business model itself, and from that, hopefully new revenues and new opportunities to grow. And I think Antoine's messages around data isn't the problem. There's this huge amount of data out there. Antoine is making a good point that it's the right type of data, whether it be fast data, big data, small data. And then, as Hilary said, how do you use your design thinking then to put that into converting that into insight? How do you convert that into insights in a way that makes sense as people interact with you in a mobile platform, for example? These are all the different things you need to think about around data. Data isn't the problem. There's huge amounts of data.
That's great. Yeah, bring into the insight. What does that mean for where we're going and our strategic direction and so on?
Yeah. I'm
going to ask Tom to summarize in a second, but just to remind us all, and do keep posting your questions away in the chat, and this recording will be available. So we've had a look at three kind of very different angles. First video looking at the digital technologies, digital value chain, and the rise of important roles like the developer. Then we had a look at leveraging a business model for innovation and growth and various notions around breakout strategy and this agility, attacking your sailing boat. And then the final one was looking at data, but bringing it back to the point of, well, how are we going to use this data to gain insight? So, Tom, I'd just like you to sort of summarize, really, your thoughts from the discussions and any particular comments that have sparked your thinking from our participants as a whole.
Thanks, Peter. I think one of the challenges here in reflecting the comments that people are making online is the actual doing of all of this. And one of the challenges, as has been reflected by the speakers this evening, is the issue of what do you do with all of this data? We all know that data matters. We don't necessarily know how to gather it. And when we gather it, we don't often know what to do with it. So sometimes I think you have to kind of work backwards rather than sort of starting with the data. You have to start with the strategy. I would say that, of course, but one has to start really with what is the purpose, what are the objectives of the enterprise, what's the vision for this business, and who are our key customers, and what is it that they want and expect. And working back from a sense of your positioning, your vision, your objectives, to saying, well, what data do we need to really enhance that, to get closer to our understanding of that, to be able to deliver faster, more effectively on that. I think that's really what matters. And consequently, bringing together digital with big data and with strategy and business models is a complex enterprise, but I think the bridge to doing so is having that firm understanding of the strategy and how you can leverage then the technology to deliver on that.
Tom, thank you very much. Very nicely summarised the central role of strategy and strategic thinking. So before we say goodbye to our panelists, just a reminder of the fact that we do have this regular series of business perspective events, so keep an eye out on the newsletter and the website. And they seem to be very popular, been running now for over 2 years, and so we're always gaining new insights and learning more from those. The way you can comment, there are various blogs and LinkedIn groups, or get in touch, email the alumni team. There's a very rich set of channels, I would say, in which we can engage and continue the conversation. So before we say goodbye, just want a parting word really from Hilary, Jerry, then Tom, and then we'll be calling it a wrap. So Hilary, a parting thought from you, please.
Well, actually, just pinning back to what Tom said, completely agree, of course, as somebody who's involved in strategy, that strategy comes first. But I think certainly in terms of what our audience has been saying, it does seem that we have a real need to examine our resources and capabilities to see if we can embrace these changes and we can make the most of them and make strategy happen.
Thank you. And Jerry?
I would just like to thank everybody for the questions on the session this evening and the wide variation of different perspectives that have been raised by the participants. It's been very
wonderful. Thank you. And well, we've already heard from Tom, but is there anything else you want to add before we close this session?
Just to follow up what I said earlier, perhaps, Peter, which is be careful about fads and be careful about following what others do. Start with your own principles, your own objectives, and then leverage from there. Don't just follow everybody else.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you very much indeed to our participants. We had 160 at one stage, which is a pretty good number, and a big virtual hand clap to our three panelists, Jerry Tehan, Tom Lawton and Hilary Collins. Thank you very much, and also to Jess from Workcast for running the platform and all the tech problems. So thanks very much indeed to you all, and thank you to the OUBS Alumni Office for arranging this, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.